must rise above the flames.
Welcome back, Flick Knaves. I'm Lupinefiasco. This is Daily Fab Gameplay, and we have just concluded a fantastic weekend of Flesh and Blood in Memphis, culminating in 2 callings and a classic constructed Battle Hardened. At the time I'm recording this, we do not know yet which hero won the Battle Hardened, but we do know that Brody Prologue took down the Friday calling with Cindra, Drakai of Retribution, in what I would call an upset performance. Brody, obviously a fantastic player who piloted Cindra very well, but the fact that the winner was Cindra, a new hero from the Hunted, and not a Mistville hero, particularly Zen, who was not even represented in the top 8 of the Friday calling, is pretty spectacular in its own. Brody piloting a redline Cindra deck that was designed in large part by Yuki Lee Bender, who also piloted the deck to a day to finish, is going to be the subject of this video. I will be comparing it to the Cindra deck that I've been playing on the channel, talking about the extensive differences and where I might have gotten Mask of the Pouncing Lynx compared to Mask of Momentum wrong, and how we'll be rectifying that moving forward. If you have not already done so, please consider a YouTube subscription. It is the best free way to support me and to make sure that you see every new episode of Daily Fab Gameplay in your YouTube feed, including more Cindra commentary and gameplay reviews. I also have a Blue Sky, a Discord, and a Patreon, links to which are in the video description below. Patrons at the Arc Lightning tier or higher will receive all of the matchup guides for all of my deck lists forever, including Cindra, the existing Cindra list, and what I will be updating it to following this review of the Redline deck, which, getting into it now, we'll start by looking at the actual list itself. This list is available in the video description and was shared on the calling stream. We know that this is the exact 80 that Yuki and Brody were playing. First and foremost, we have Mask of Momentum in the main. That is the point of this deck, as I had originally posited with Cindra, but I got it a little wrong. I was playing 22 blues in my initial Mask of Momentum Cindra deck, and if we scroll down through both the 60 and what I believe the inventory is, we see exactly 3 blues in the form of Warmonger's Diplomacy, which exists for Azalea, potentially Viserai, and really no other hero. I don't believe that Brody brought Warmongers into any of his matches against Kano. So where I was playing 22 blues in the main board, Brody and Yuki were playing 0, and in fact they were only playing 2 non-red cards in their initial 60, so that is quite a difference. And we can run through those differences very quickly, mostly for the purposes of entertainment, right? This is a lot of red. And where you might be looking at this and thinking, wow, Lupine really got it wrong. Lupine really missed hard. Yes, I did in a lot of ways, but when comparing the blue count to Brody's list, when comparing yellows, the exact reds that I was playing, we can start to see where the confusion might have come from. So my Cindra list had been built on this idea of trying to draw into a blue every hand and using it to pay for kunais, using it to pay for cards like Compounding Anger with kunai compounding, or using it to go off with Dagger, Blood Runs Deep, rebuy the daggers, Dagger, break, Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, attack with Salt the Wound. A lot of these choices become pretty apparent why there is a difference once you start to realize that Brody and Yuki's Redline Cindra just doesn't ever want to pay for daggers. They never want to kunai. They never want to pay for anything by pitching cards. And the real card that makes this deck tick is Blood Splattered Vest, and I've talked about this. Every Cindra deck builder has identified Blood Splattered Vest as the chess piece for a ninja deck, being that it can turn hits with daggers into resources, and that pairs very well with Flick Knives, which says that we can throw a dagger. That dagger damage is not blockable. It cannot be prevented with Arcane Barrier. It can only be prevented with straight-up damage prevention. And we do have effects like that, Shelter from the Storm being the most prominent one, but many heroes don't have a way to prevent damage if they aren't playing Shelter, and specifically if they don't have Shelter in their hand when we Flick Knives. Flick Knives also pairs very well with Mask of Momentum, as I have talked about on the channel before, where Flick Knives will not trigger your Mask of Momentum, but it will keep your momentum chain alive. If you hit with 2 attacks in a row and then attack with an attack action card as your third chain link, and your opponent blocks that attack completely, if you flick a dagger, Mask of Momentum sees a hit on that chain link. It was not a hit from an attack action card, but it was a hit. So now if you attack with a 4th attack action card following the chain that was blocked, this attack also needs to be blocked, or else you will draw a card. So the fact that Mask of Momentum, Flick Knives, and Blood Splattered Vest all work together is very powerful. That is very powerful synergy, where 3 cards that are individually strong come together to create a whole greater than the sum of its parts, and those parts were already very good. Dragonscaler Flight Path being the boots, as we've seen, really did not matter. The important part of Dragonscaler Flight Path is this 1 in the bottom right corner. The fact that this has a point of block means that it and a 3 block can cover Leave No Witnesses, Snatch, anything that Aurora plays to try and trigger Channel Lightning Valley or Burn Up. And yes, Dragonscaler Flight Path does have text on it, and that text is sometimes relevant, but sometimes it does not get you that many points on offense. We saw Yuki Lee Bender win a game in round 1 on Friday. This was a streamed game where she used Dragonscaler Flight Path to give a dagger an additional attack. So in that game, Flight Path was only worth 3 points of value compared to Snapdragon Scalers, which is usually worth 4 or more, and in the Cindra list that I was playing would have been worth 5, 6, potentially 8 with Lava Burst, Salt the Wound. But in this deck, where everything is Draconic, we don't need Snapdragons. This is effectively Snapdragon. We are not playing very many cards that could brick a hand if we draw them all together. So where Snapdragons is sometimes necessary to get you out of a hand without a Draconic starter, this deck will always have something to do, and if it doesn't, then you're just blocking very aggressively. So all of the equipment works very well together. And I specifically want to talk about Mask of Momentum and why I got it wrong. Why I said that Mask of Momentum is lower value than Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, and the reason is that my deck had blues in it. If you work very hard to trigger Mask of Momentum and you draw a bad blue for your arsenal, that was a wasted mask. You would have rather optimized your turn sequencing better. Instead of sending dagger, dagger, attack, you would have preferred to dagger, break chain, dagger, attack, flick, rebuy both daggers. You're getting more value on average sequencing for Mask of the Pouncing Lynx than you are for Mask of Momentum if you assume that your deck has cards in it that you don't want to put in your arsenal. I believe my original Cindra list had Warmonger's Diplomacy in the main, for example, and in 90% of your matchups, you never want to play Warmonger's Diplomacy. So if you have no cards in your hand and you draw Warmongers, you are probably skipping your arsenal and taking an intellect penalty. But when every card in your deck, except for 2 copies of Branded Cinderclaw, are red, and functionally, let's say 3/4 of the deck are the same card, you are extremely happy to draw any of them, because on average you're drawing a 3 power 0 cost attack. Sometimes it costs 4, sometimes it attacks for 4, sometimes it attacks for 5, and that just means that where Mask of the Pouncing Lynx is worth 6 to 8 points one time, Mask of Momentum is worth 3 to 4 points as many times as you can trigger it throughout the game, and the deck is designed to trigger Mask of Momentum and to make it difficult for your opponent to stop the Mask of Momentum. The entire deck is 0 for 3s, 0 for 4s, and a handful of 1 for 5s that we use our Flick Knives with Blood Splattered Vest to pay for. And the Flick Knives is even keeping our Mask of Momentum hit chain alive while we are doing that. So the entire deck just comes together in a way that works very well with Mask of Momentum. If we look at the sideboard, we start to see where we have room for support in the mirror, in other aggro matchups, or specifically against Assassin. I had talked about Loyalty Beyond the Grave as a really good piece of Phi tech, as you are able to just maintain a healthy life total, put your loyalties into discard, and then when you find space to send a larger chain of links, you keep a larger hand. Loyalty just says this is your 4th, 5th, 6th card in a hand, and the same applies to Cindra, especially when all of your cards are functionally the same. Loyalty will always turn into a 0 for 3, a 0 for 4, a 0 for 5, or a 1 for 5, which all accelerate your game plan. Shelter from the Storm is an incredible defense reaction. 0 for 4 out of arsenal or hand, potentially 0 for 3 out of hand, but covering up breakpoints or flicked knives or dagger attacks. Very good for the mirror, very good for Assassin. Wax On is a defense reaction that I was sleeping on, but is very good in this meta because of the prevalence of Assassin. Being able to 1-card 5 a Leave No Witnesses from New, who has Arousing Wave, will always cover Leave No Witnesses plus the attack reaction. Being able to cover up Persuasive Prognosis and Justinic with Wax On and your Dragon Scalar Flight Path is really good. You can block the Prognosis with your Flight Path, and when you Justinics it, you get to respond with your own 0 for 5. So Wax On is very strong in an Assassin meta, while also being great against Aurora and other Cindras. Warmonger's Diplomacy is here for Azalea, potentially Viserai. We didn't see any Viserai games streamed, so I don't know if Redline Cindra wants to bring this in or just wants more consistency against Viserai. Bringing in blue will make your Ravenous Rabble worse, but against Azalea, getting to shut down their big 3-pump Dominate Red in the Ledger turn just buys you space to continue attacking Azalea. Azalea is never going to block a Mask of Momentum trigger because half of her cards block for 2, and she needs those to present on hits that you actually care about. And finally, we have AB1 Spell Void 1, which we saw Brody use to great effect against 2 Kanos. I had thought that Arcane Lantern was kind of cope in Redline Cindra, right? She doesn't play the blues, she can't pitch effectively to AB1. But here's where Arcane Lantern really shines, is Cindra never attacks with her daggers. Effectively, her second dagger is just for decoration, because she's only ever flicking the 1 to get a point of damage, extend a Mask of Momentum chain, generate a resource with Blood Splattered Vest, and because so many of her attacks are draconic, she can usually buy that dagger back at the end of the combat chain. So the second dagger is kind of meaningless, which means that it is an easy swap for Arcane Lantern, which can then be paid for with an extra red from hand. As we saw in, I believe, Brody's finals game, he did have a hand of Art of Dragonfire, Breaking Point, and there might have even been a Demonstrate Devotion in it, which now, well, he can't play all of those in the same hand, in the same turn, but he can start to pitch them to Arcane Barrier, or pitching an extra Lava Burst into Arcane Barrier if he can't attack with it, or pitching a red to just stay alive through either Wildfire, or if you have the read that Kano is going to try to pop off, you can flick your single dagger, generate a resource with Blood Splattered Vest, and keep that around to pay into Arcane Barrier. And finally, we have Spellfray Leggings, which is just an easy 1-to-1 for Dragon Scalar Flight Path against Kano. Kano will never attack you with physical damage. The 1 point of block on Flight Path really doesn't matter. You are going to be consistently pressuring Kano with all of your draws, and because Flight Path is very rarely used for more than 2 points of damage, you would rather keep Spellfray Leggings around, which will always convert to more prevention on that Wildfire turn. So when we are looking at this deck and we see 58 nearly identical cards, we see why Mask of Momentum is so good. It will always draw you 3 points of value at minimum. And when your deck is designed to attack 3, 4, 5 times in a turn, you are going to be repeatedly threatening with Mask of Momentum. You are always going to be flicking knives. You are always going to be rebuying your dagger. And so you are always pressuring your opponent to block the Mask of Momentum. If they do, great, you just mitigated some life loss because your opponent had to give you 1 or 2 cards on defense. If your opponent doesn't block the Mask of Momentum trigger, you draw another Head Jab, another Blaze Headlong, another Lava Burst, and you get to just keep sending damage. So Mask of Momentum is always worth more than Pouncing Lynx when you know that your card is always going to be a hit. And that is where I got it wrong with Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. Mask of the Pouncing Lynx will always be worth more than your single Mask of Momentum trigger, but it will not be worth more than 2 Mask of Momentum triggers when those momentum triggers are always bangers. Just talking about the singular one-ofs that we do have in the deck, we have Breaking Point, which is fantastic disruption. We have Art of the Dragon Fire, which pairs very well with the 5 fealty triggers that this Cindra list can produce. Art of the Dragon Fire is a 1 for 7. We have Dragon Power, which is a 1 for 7. We have Demonstrate Devotion, which is a 1 for 4, but can make you that critical fealty token. We also have Hunt the Hunter, which is a 1 for 5 that blocks 3 and can mark a hero. Mark in this deck effectively the same as generating fealty because of how Flick Knives interacts with a marked hero. If you flick a dagger, that dagger has hit. Cindra says that when you hit a marked target, you generate a fealty token. So really the deck does just work very well together, and being able to flick, generate a resource from Blood Splattered Vest, and then attack with Art of Dragon Fire for 7, or Dragon Power for 7, or Breaking Point for 5+ disruption works really well. With multiple fealties, or Brand with Cinder Claws, you can turn Art of the Dragon Blood into resources to pay for your finishers, which means that you get to maintain the availability of your Blood Splattered Vest by saving your stain counters. There is just so much synergy in this deck that all pairs with Mask of Momentum, that all pairs with Flick Knives, Blood Splattered Vest, even Flight Path when you draw into multiple finishers, that just make this entire deck greater than the sum of its parts, and that's where I got it wrong. I think this deck is very good. I'm very excited to play with this deck on the channel and in my locals. Historically, Draconic Ninja's weakness has been disruption. Draconic Ninja had a problem dealing with Assassin because if Assassin could take your only blue, that kind of shut down Fi's turn. Or if it took 2 cards out of your hand, you might just have a 2-card 7, and you can't keep up with the Assassin's value. But as we saw multiple times on stream, this deck just shuts down Assassins. The Assassins need to draw very well consistently to strip 2 or more cards out of your hand every turn, because as soon as they don't, as soon as they're taking 3, 4, 4 in a turn, they have to start blocking with cards from hand and armor, and Assassin has this ability now to scale very well with the number of cards in hand. So if you are able to take those cards from Assassin, Assassin can't chain the disruption together, and if Assassin isn't chaining disruption, you are going to outvalue them turn to turn with Cindra, and as soon as your Assassin opponent starts giving you the armor, that is armor block that they don't have for later turns, which means that you will start triggering your Mask of Momentum and going up on cards, and if you are going up on cards over Assassin, it's a foregone conclusion. You're going to just win the game. Where I think this deck will struggle is into Jarl, but even then, I don't think it's doomed. You look at Jarl, you think Ice Hero, Channel Lake Frigid will Time Walk Cindra. And I think for the most part that's true. If you have 4 reds and your opponent plays Channel Lake Frigid, at most you're putting together a 4-card 8, which is really not where you want to be. But Jarl only has 3 Channel Lake Frigids in the deck. If Jarl decks start copying what we saw Michael Hamilton bring, they aren't going to be playing Mangles, they aren't playing Exposed to the Elements, and if they are on primarily Earth, that means they aren't triggering Jarl's ability. They aren't breaking your armor. You should also not break your armor in this case. And even if you used your flight path to generate 5 extra damage in a turn, or you used all 3 stain counters on Blood Splattered Vest, the Jarl just doesn't have that many ice cards to give you Frostbite. So I think we are going to see a shift in the meta coming out of Calling Memphis, that Jarls may be rising to prominence, bringing more ice cards, and that opens the door for Enigma to start preying on these Jarls that are attempting to prey on the Cindras. We put ourselves into sort of a rock, paper, scissors meta where Jarls are attempting to prey on Cindra, Cindras are preying on Enigmas, and Enigmas are preying on Jarls, with Assassin kind of scattered throughout this meta. But even in this situation, I think that Jarl has enough bad matchups that at least for the first few weeks of Road to Nationals, he just won't exist. Enigma, terrible matchup. Viserai, terrible matchup. Zen, not the good matchup that Jarl is looking for. Aurora, I don't think has as much power against Jarl as I've heard some people claim, but she is still a threat. She can deal that split damage that Jarl doesn't want to need to deal with. And so I think that, at least for the time being, until Viserai goes, certainly, and maybe until after Enigma goes, Jarl just won't be that powerhouse that he needs to be in order to consistently top 8 and prey on Cindras. This Redline Cindra is extremely consistent, extremely powerful, does a lot of really cool interactive things, and she is going to be an absolute menace to deal with. So I'm excited to start playing with her, excited to start testing and innovating. Probably the most important thing that anyone who wants to play this Cindra deck can do is start to think about how to win the mirror. If you're paired against another Redline Cindra, the same list, whoever wins the die roll is going to have a significant advantage. That has always been the case with Draconic Ninja mirrors, where you get to block out on your opponent's first turn if they push damage, and then you get to send the first real attack back at them. Yes, Cindra does have a lot of 3 blocks in the deck. She isn't just dead in the water to a big pop-off turn, but like I was talking about with the Assassin matchup, if the Assassin is consistently stripping 2 of your cards every turn, Cindra is going to be in some trouble. She won't be able to consistently threaten Mask of Momentum triggers. And if you lose the die roll in the Cindra mirror, and your opponent gets to send 4 attacks on turn 1, you cannot prevent the Mask of Momentum trigger. And if you tried to, you would give up 2 cards to do it. You would end up keeping 2 cards in hand, and you would have trouble then threatening your own Mask of Momentum trigger, and the game could spiral from there. So finding a way to break the mirror is going to be paramount for anyone who wants to play the Cindra deck. But say you are in a scene where your locals don't like Ninja, they like Assassin, they like Illusionist, they like Runeblade. I think Cindra is going to be a very, very strong deck to play this RTN season, at least until someone figures out how to break it. But even then, say someone builds the Jarl deck that can shut down Cindra, has a reasonable Viserai matchup, and doesn't just auto-lose to Enigma, it's going to be really hard for that information to disseminate throughout the world over the course of 4 weeks. I would think that if someone does figure out how to break the Cindra mirror, or shut down Cindra entirely with a different hero while also having a reasonable matchup into the larger scene, that tech will reveal itself at Pro Tour London. So, to close, as a Cindra player myself, it was very cool to see this deck. I was happy to see Yuki and Brody do so well with it. Very cool to see a new hero from The Hunted win the very first calling since The Hunted's release. I'm excited to start playing with and innovating on this deck. And I hope that you are all excited to join me. I will be playing it on the channel over the next few weeks. Just tinkering, trying to work through the lines. I know from Fi that the deck is not so brain dead as just putting 4 cards on the table and letting your opponent figure out. There are sequencing intricacies to put together. You cannot just no-block through every turn, especially if your opponent has relevant on-hits, learning how to block as Draconic Ninja is a good skill to have and very critical to winning games. So we will work on all of that together, and catch me back here later this week to see that. If you have not already done so, the best way to keep up to date with my Cindra content is to subscribe to my channel. As I said, I have a Blue Sky, a Discord, and a Patreon, links to which are in the video description below. There will be matchup guides for this Cindra list that I will put together. If you subscribe to the Patreon, you will get those matchup guides for yourself forever, even if you immediately unsubscribe. And that's about it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I hope that you now understand why Mask of Momentum is so much better than Mask of the Pouncing Lynx in this specific list. Until the next time I see you on Daily Fab Gameplay, take care.